My name is Cherie Bridges Patrick, and I welcome you to this presentation. Obviously, I'm a social worker because I love to be a social worker, right? But I also do mental health work. Right now, I have the privilege of working with Somali families. That's all I do all day long. Well, I mean, collaborating with other agencies. But it's been such a unique and wonderful experience because I didn't know anything about Somali families. And I still don't know anything about, I mean, I know a little bit, but there's so much to learn. And so it's really stretched me as a social worker and as a human being to work with people who are very, very different from me. And so I've got a lot of multicultural mental health work. And then I've worked with children most of my career in issues related a lot to trauma and loss. I've worked in foster care and such, okay? I'm assuming everybody in here is a social worker, trying to be a social worker, wants to be a no? So, this is fascinating. So, you know, and I made the assumption that everybody was gonna be students, and that's clearly an assumption, and that's not true, right? So anyway, forgive my presentation there, but we've got some folks who are not social workers. What? Are you willing to share what you do?
I'm the Director of Development for the College of Social Work here.
Oh, okay. Well, you're in social work. Okay, that counts.
But I don't have a license.
Okay, okay.
So I work for Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah. So a lot of social emotional needs and connections between mentors and mentees. But not a licensed social worker. Work with some social workers, but you don't have to be a social worker
That's
to work at Big Brothers Big Sisters or to be a mentor.
Did we get a plug? Did we get a shameless plug for the Big Brothers and Big Sisters? And
I'm a social worker. I work in the College of Social Work as academic counselor.
okay, great. Who does? I saw somebody. Do you have one of these? There you go. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna leave these down this way. So if you see people, point them in, and I'll have them grab them. Okay. What I would like to do is we don't have a lot of time, right? And I was cutting it really close on the last session, but I really believe that it is important for us to know how to build relationships, and we can't do that rushing through things, right? So I'm going to take a few minutes, and I'd like for you to humor me and humor each other by just giving your name, your first name, and tell me just in a few words why you do what you do. We know that you're not a social worker, right? But you're in the social work field, okay? So why does this have an interest for you? And the reason I asked it even before Dr. Strayhorn said it this morning, okay? But it's, you know, I often wonder why people do this work, because this is hard work. I mean, it's really hard work. But the difficulty of it and the rewards sort of balance out. So, because of time, I'm going to go ahead and ask. I'll come to you last since you just walked in. I won't put you on the spot like that. If you two lovely ladies would start, name and why you do what you do. You go.
So I'm Abby Fisher with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I just believe in the power of mentoring, and so essentially the power of people and that relationship building and how that can really instill a sense of confidence and self-advocacy and a belief in themselves so we can lift up the youth from whatever situation that they're facing so they can have a positive trajectory in whatever path they want to see. If that doesn't mean college and it's a technical school or a well-paying job, whatever that means, just making sure that they feel what their success is for each.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I am Amy Bibler, and I am the Director of Development at the College of Social Work here. And I love fundraising for the college because, as Dr. Strayhorn said, people will pay for change. And it's actually something that really rings true to my heart, where you're meeting with individuals who want to make a difference in the world, but they're not a social worker. So they know that you're the change agent, and you're the ones out there in the field, and they want to make that happen for you. And in turn, they're creating that change for you. So it's been a great experience.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brenda Davidson. I work in the College of Social Work as an academic counselor. I would say that I didn't choose social work chose me. So over time, working with my experiences, I get one good positive stroke that keeps me going. So that's how I've continued.
Okay.
I'm Jennifer Cease. I am the program manager for the social work program at the Newark campus. I kind of feel like Brenda kind of chose me, but I also grew up in poverty, and so I feel very strongly about advocating for change for kids who grow up impoverished like I did, and what a difference college made in my life and my opportunities. And so I like to, now I teach, and so I like to educate these kids who come to the university who really have no understanding what it's like to grow up poor. And so giving them a better social conscious about what it means to not be privileged in society.
Okay. Okay. We'll move over here. Are you ready to go? Do you need a little more time? I just need an introduction and why you're doing social work or
My name is Penny Carroll, and I'm a lecturer and a field coordinator for the Newark campus College of Social Work. Why did I choose to study social work? I just grew up, culturally speaking, just in the helping professions, from nurses and in my family, and a grandmother that just helped a community of people, and just observing that and watching that, and just the love for people that needed help. And I just, thought that this field was just a valuable field and to give back.
Okay. Thank you.
My name's Debbie. I'm your social worker. I think initially it was because it was a marketable degree. I was a rec therapist, and I just couldn't spend the time, do the work the same with the kids that I worked with. I wanted to work with families and make some changes. So I think ER social work allows me the ability to work with people in crisis, an opportunity to make changes, and it's been rewarding.
Thank you.
I'm Tim. When I was in high school, I was real religious. Not anymore, but that was kind of what drove me. One time I thought I was going to be a minister, and I thought I was trying to find a major that might fit well with it. And I thought social work seemed like a good major. Then I kind of discovered social work and kind of put the whole religious thing on the back burner and went into the social work field because it was a way. Because I grew up in the church, helping people and doing mission work and all that sort of thing. So I didn't know that you could actually get paid to do what we were doing. Kind of volunteer, so it sort of caught me, so to speak, and so I've stayed in social work all that time.
Okay.
Now I teach social work.
Oh, wow.
School.
Okay.
I'm Melanie. I work at the Area Agency on Aging with older adults. I think I originally went into it because I had a lot of personal things I needed to do with. I think a lot of us come into social work because they have personal things they need to do with. But I've always been like a strong carer, and I was very compassionate for people, and people fascinate me. So I get to hear people's stories and connect with them and show them that I care and hopefully help them, in some way if they desire that gift that I give them. So.
Thank you.
My name is Teresa Hazelwood. I work in the College of Social Work as an academic counselor. I teach and develop some courses too. Like they said before, social work chose me, and I decided to come back to the college after some years in the field. It's because of the fact that people don't respect social work because they don't know what social work is. So I felt that by maybe working in the college, it would allow for me to be able to kind of advocate how to produce good social workers. And also how they can then go out and affect the change and maybe get people to know more about social work and what we do and why we're important, other than help me find my dentures or help me get a bus pass and things like that. All the social workers get responsible for doing.
I'm Beth Thies, and I graduated from School of Social Work in the late 70s, and my first job was with Only Stable in an institution from closed, and I've worked with the county since then. Probably my greater influence was my mom. She graduated from School of Social Work when I started here in my freshman year, so she went back to school and that gave me a lot of
Thank you.
My name is Steve David. I work in communications for the ACLU of Ohio. I got into social work partly watching my wife do it, and then I also had a really powerful experience getting my undergrad in women's gender sexuality studies at Ohio State. And this is a really, social work provides a really good tool and avenue to implement some of those things that the critical humanities engage in really practical ways.
I'm Anka Peach. I actually just started the job at Big Brothers Big Sisters. After coming back from staying home with the kids. I have always loved working with people and helping people and connecting people with resources to just empower them. And so.
Thank you.
I'm Stacy Song. I'm an academic advisor here in the college as well. And I initially went into social work because I wanted to close the achievement gap. So to be part of that change without actually being an educator.
Hi, I'm Jenna Summers. I'm a faculty instruction assistant in the College of Social Work. But I guess I do what I do just because I like assisting people and interacting with people. And I really just enjoy working in a college setting. And I have the privilege of assisting people who help others and do research that helps
Oh,
others.
wow. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
I'm Stephanie Baker, and I work at Clintonville Mutual Community Resources Center. And I'm in the field of social work because it's work that's important and needs to be done.
Thank you.
I'm Frankie Jones Harris. I'm not a social worker. I'm a communications director at the College of Social Work. So I have the privilege of promoting a lot of the research that our social work faculty.
Okay. And thank you for joining me again. Yes.
Excuse me, I'm Gail Lowe. I came into social work late. I got my undergraduate degree in like economics, but when I got older and I wanted to look at different fields, when I looked at the jobs, it was like, well, this one needs an MSW and this one needs an MSW, and these were the ones that sounded like the kind of job I wanted. And plus, I'd been working at the Literacy Council where we were at that point, and I saw how much need there was for like social work, and so it drew me in for that. And
Okay.
I recognized that I made the wrong decision way back when, and should have gone into social work in the beginning.
Thank you. And last but not least.
I'm Katie Justice. I work for the college in career advising, and I guess why social work. Just life experiences social worker as a youth, and so that kind of inspired me. But just coming to the college and seeing how passionate and excited these students are, just every day makes you excited. So that just keeps me going.
Good.
And I'll sign your certificates at the very end.
Okay, so don't leave this place without seeing this lady. And everybody signed in? Okay. And did I hear from everybody? I feel like I would. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let's get moving. Okay, and I'm going to breeze through this because I want to get down to the business, okay? We're going to talk about the history of race, and it's just an overview, but we'll see what we can do with it since we had that great introduction, and actually it was more than an introduction by Dr. Strahan. He really set the tone for this, and so he's done all the initial work, so we'll see how far we can get. And then we'll talk about the implications of inequity in social work. We'll be looking at a video and reflecting on it and sharing our reflections. Like I said, I'm going to breeze through this. Here's where I'm going to take a real quick pause because this is really important. When we start to talk about race, folks get uncomfortable, right? Let's just get real about it. Okay? It's not a subject that we want to talk about. We try everything we can do to avoid it. As social workers, we have a responsibility to talk about it because we can't do anything about it until we do put it out on the table and call it what it is and call our feelings what they are, right? So today, in the short time that we have together, we're going to do that, right? The one rule I have is, by all means, you must be respectful to one another, okay? Feelings are your feelings, and they can be as wild and crazy as we want them, right? As we let them. Respect is real important. Good? Okay. And I slipped 2 slides in on respect, and you'll see that in your PowerPoint, so just disregard my little whatever. Okay, core values of social workers. Dr. Strahan, or no, it wasn't Dr. Strahan, it was the lady who spoke after him, already went through these. We know what those values are, and are we living them every day? That's just a question, right? Just a question. Are we living those values as social workers? And how would you know? Real quickly, the difference between equity and inequality. It's a big difference. Equity is about fairness, about being impartial. Equality is about being equal, right? So today we're talking about inequity, the inequity of racism and all the issues around race. Okay? Okay. So I'm about to show you a video clip. I think we've got a total of 4 of them. What I want you to do is just, you know, sit back, relax, enjoy the movie. I don't have any popcorn. But think about how this moves you. Think about what's going on with your body, your thoughts, your feelings as you're watching these things. And then we'll have 2 minutes to reflect. You can reflect in writing, and then we're going to bring it all together and start talking about it. Okay? Oops. Let's see here.
The system.
What just happened?
The system of inequity is embedded in history, culture, and identity. It has internal components and external components. These components are moved or influenced by power and economics. The internal components consist of bias, privilege, and internalized racism. The external components play out in relationships, which are interpersonal, institutional, and structural. All of these layers are happening simultaneously, and they are churning out inequities. In the Western world, we worship the disguise of science. All else can remain silent. That's the supernatural, the spiritual, and unexplained oddities we need facts. That which you can see and grasp facts. Europe is not and has never been a continent. Yet they teach us it is all through school. So when I raise my hand in class and ask, hey, teach, time is defined as a large landmass completely or almost completely surrounded by water. Europe is neither large nor even almost surrounded by water. How is it kind? I can look at it as a fool. Teach tells me because it is. Now, this never fooled me as a kid. I didn't get the answer needed. I was disrupting the rest of your class period. So now I'm in the principal's office being asked to explain why I'm questioning the comments delivered. And I find myself saying, this country is hypocrisy from top to bottom. You raised me to focus on facts. I know what you asked. I let me know I'm digging.
Puerto Rico, in many ways, is very homogeneous in the way that it is perceived. We have taken on an essential identity where we're all Latinos or we're all Puerto Ricans. Then we forget the history of slavery. We forget the history of Dutch Spaniard domination. We forget the history of Arawak genocide and how that creates the Latino. And so often we think about the Puerto Rican or the Latino without thinking about the historical and colonial legacies that have over time constructed who we are today.
My mother explained slavery to me. And I remember I was really, like in elementary school, and she described slavery, that people, human beings were slaves. And I didn't understand what she meant, so I asked her to explain that. What do you mean? They had them to do a lot of chores? Because she had us doing a lot of chores at home. But I knew that wasn't what she meant, but I wanted to, what do I compare this to? She said, oh, no, sugar, They couldn't be married, they couldn't keep their children, they didn't have their own souls. Everything was taken from them, and your grandfather, she meant her father. His father was a slave. I said, no way. I said, well, why did the people let themselves be slaves? And she said, oh, Eric, it wasn't like that. The whole government supported it. So sad, I don't think I could cry about it. I just couldn't fathom grown-ups, as I thought of them, being that mean. Just mean. I didn't have a name for it, just mean.
Hawaii was conquered by white people. The queen was dethroned. Hawaiian people were put on plantations to work alongside Japanese people, Filipino and Chinese people. Many Hawaiians were converted to Christianity. There's a kind of assimilation that tries to happen. The Hawaiian monarchy wearing English clothes, and the collar, the dresses with the high collars, the very Victorian, English kinds of clothes. And people kind of glorifying that royalty, but yet they're living in shacks. And I'm not talking about grass shacks. I'm talking about squalor shacks. Slums.
No one had ever told me the truth. They told me about Crispus Attucks. Okay, and I don't have anything against Crispus Attucks, but I needed to know more than the black men who fought in the American Revolution, But I didn't get the truth. I was told a watered down story about Native Americans, and I watched TV shows that showed Native peoples as savages that didn't speak any language that was discernible. African people that had bones through their noses and had no language except booga booga. When I realized that this is what not only I was taught, but all of the nation's children and people were being taught this, I was so pissed off.
I think there's a misconception that's out there in mainstream society that sees our people as primitive and uncivilized. There was a high level of organized society that existed around us, to the point where I would say that as colonizers came to our land, as the settlers came, they mimicked and followed some of those ways of looking at the way that we did our governance. But I'd like to start before that to talk about the strength and the way of life that we had. And sometimes it's difficult to talk fully about who we are because over the years we've lost a lot.
I had to learn U.S. history in a new way. Learning about the Marshall Islands in particular, the history of U.S. bomb testing on Marshall Islands.
The bombs were 1,000 times bigger than the bombs that got into Hiroshima, exceeding the power of that bomb, as vastly as it exceeded the greatest high-explosive guns of World War II.
There's a one long skinny island where the U.S. military base is, and then there's this other island called Abai, where all the folks of color live, and they come over during the day and work in a lot of the service sector jobs, and then go back at the end of the day. and also have radiation from all of the bomb testing that happened, in the mid 20th century. That was something I had no idea about.
How many of our stories are left untold? Buried under piles of dust, waiting to be forgotten. Can we truly forget them? Or do they just get told in other ways?
So let's take 2 minutes. Just jot your thoughts down. 2 minutes. Okay. Who's willing to share what resonated with you? What captured your attention? What didn't you know? What's new to you? Yes.
Well, it wasn't new, but just her explaining about how angry she felt when she learned about slavery and why did the name rebel and why were people like that? And just realizing that my experience learning about slavery was much different because my ancestors weren't slaves. So I felt like, what? Seriously? When I learned about it, but I think the impact would be different to learn that it was your people that were enslaved and, understanding her frustration and anger.
Okay. Yes.
Well, I find myself feeling angry that I went all the way through school and didn't really learn about a lot of this until probably after I got out of college. Even when I went to college, we didn't look really closely at history. And then, sort of tied to that is that when I now try to present this sort of material to students, the sort of attitude is like, so what? That just burns me up.
Yes.
I was thinking about the third question, how misinformation and absence of information impacted me. I was thinking, went back, way back, middle school and high school, and how I really received a lot of misinformation specifically about history. Pretty much Malcolm X and Martin Luther King was pretty much the only history that we received coming from a rural southern area.
I'm so sorry. I had my timer on to watch. Oh, I'm sorry.
But as I attended, I wrote on here that I graduated feeling very powerless. But when I attended I ended up attending a HBCU University as my undergraduate.
Which one?
And there I was informed, we had convocations, I got a lot of information about history that I never even knew existed. I didn't know that we were kings and queens and different, I didn't even know these things. And I left that school, that undergraduate school, empowered. So I've just reflected back, which allowed me to be where I am today, feeling very secure, confident in certain things.
Okay.
I know.
What HBCU?
I graduated from Central State University.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
I had put down omission without truths. And I think the segment that resonated for me was the young man that talked about questioning the teacher. And he's labeled as, defiant, oppositional, troublemaker. And so I think in terms of, asking questions, and after a time, you no longer ask any question. And you just kind of sit back and, just take in, but don't provide any input.
So when you think about that, you think about all this stuff, and we're social workers, and we work with people who have been marginalized and oppressed by race, and this is a group that is predominantly white. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? How does that impact you and your interactions with clients? Talk to me. Yes.
I mean, I think it would help you take a moment to step outside of yourself and reflect upon yourself and what you can do with like mitigating your own personal biases, like in the work that you're doing. Essentially, just have self-reflection before you step into any of your work.
Yes.
And I guess the question is, how many social workers are really exposed to this type of information? I mean, I don't even know if they know the history, behind, Black African Americans' experience in other cultures as well. So if you don't have that exposure, how do you even start that process to understand? And I'm not in the school system, but my question is also, how have things changed, or have they changed? I know my kids are not that old, they're in their 20s, but I mean, as they went through school, they still weren't being exposed to the true history. So we look back at the 60s and all of what's done, but I don't see that much of a change. I mean, there's February, which many schools recognize as Black History Month, but that's pretty much it.
Right.
If they even do that.
Right. Is this information somewhat new to you?
I was just gonna say, I mean, I understand, like, there's so much that I don't know. Like, I mean, and that's, the last speaker talked about how, there's these little things, we know what we know, we know what we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. And so, being exposed to information and history and things that have impacted people is important. But I think that there's so much information, there's so many different cultures, and there's so many different experiences of everyone on the planet. I mean, we just have this huge groups coming in, refugee groups coming in that are different from, the Nepali-speaking Bhutanese are here now, and the Somalis, and we have these Asian cultures, and all of this that I can't believe that there's any person who can know all of it.
Right,
so the way that we get to a place where we can work with people who are have a different experience from us is, being open to hearing what their story is. Just being aware that every single person that you come in contact with has a different story, has a different place that they came from, and a different experience, and a different historical place that they are in, and being open to hearing that and asking questions and being curious about that. Because I can't, you couldn't teach all of it. You can have 40-minute segments for 12 years with kids, and they're not just teaching history. So it's there's some important stuff that's been missed, and I totally agree that we should teach kids more about everything. But there's just so much that you can't possibly teach it all.
Okay. Yes.
I appreciate a movie like 12 Years a Slave, trying to, do things like that that I help me at least to try and understand, you know, other cultures and learning things. But, you know, just seeing this, you know, to me, I jotted my notes that I really still don't know how to crack the codes, that there's so much to learn yet. And so that's my bottom line, but I keep trying to, you know, do more and see more and try and keep reaching out to understand more.
Thank you. One more comment and then we'll move on. Go ahead.
I think we start out with school, at least my generation, I'm sure it seemed to be the same, is that being taught that America was discovered, and that came up here. It's like, what a terrible distortion of history, or one-sided distortion of history.
Right.
I mean, there were already people here. How can you discover something that was already but we're taught that, and it's not questioned at all. I get told way down. I think that really is harmful to us. It's not just that we aren't taught enough, but we're also taught a lot of distortion and inaccuracies. It just is harmful to us down the road.
So hold on to that comment and thought about harmful to us, because I want to get into that later. Yes?
Really quickly, I'm from Germany, so I went to school in Germany, and we live in Lebanon, Ohio now, which is a very white middle class conservative place. And my kids are 8 and 10, or almost 10, and it's just, boy, do I correct and bite my tongue, and and it's really interesting because when Thanksgiving comes around, and I talk about the Indians all the time. Every time I come, and my kids are very aware about that. But are they going to speak out against their teacher and their 25 classmates? And so it's hard. It's very hard.
Wow. Yes, it is. What'd you say?
I told her in New York County, just up north of hers, ours is probably more conservative than Warren County, or Clinton County.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fact. Racially, we are almost completely the same. Ask an anthropologist. We are all, every people, less than 0.1% different. Other 99.9 is what makes us humankind, but the human mind is a master at building barriers. Fact. The human psyche will do almost anything to remove distance. Dissonance means that which is outside of your comfort zone.
When I was really young, probably up until the age of about 8 or 9, the social network, the relationships, the family friends were all mostly people of South Asian descent. I wasn't so aware of myself as a racial being. And then something shifted, and at that point I started rejecting my own culture, community, I think quite drastically. And although there were so many people of color that were around me, I really wanted to be accepted and assimilate with white people.
I was taught to think that life that's worth noticing and living is just a little wedge of the 360 degrees. Now, they didn't say it in so many words, but I was taught there are these lines that mark off the rest of the world and the rest of the world's people from what is good. And in my coming up as a child, again and again, I heard phrases like good families, good neighborhoods, good books, good music, good taste, good manners, good jobs, good investments. Those goods demarcated what I was meant to respect. And beyond which I was not meant to stir.
The college I went to was really white and really suburban. And so I had to find like a small sector of people I could hang out with, but most of those people were white. I remember, I'll never forget this, I saw an Indian person on TV, which back then was like unheard of. And I'd be like, oh my God, there's an Indian person on TV. And they'd be like, well, why is that such a big deal to you? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm Indian.
I remember when I didn't know I was black. My mother is black and black. My grandmother is an Irish woman born on a farm. My mother had very, very, very light white skin, freckles, and brown hair that falls straight. So here she is, a black girl growing up without the absolute black exterior, in a black experience, in a black family, where she's too light and white to be cool with black children, and too light black folks to be cool with white children. My father is black and from Tennessee, and my mother, I think because though she was black, didn't have, my sisters are brown skinned, nappy-headed girls, She couldn't fully understand what that meant for us. My mother would tell us things like, you're black and you're white, but more than anything, you're a good person. We have several different cultures in us and in our background. And I don't think she was deliberately dodging the issue of race, but I think she couldn't fully understand the impact. No police officer ever pulled me over and considered my racial mixture.
When I was a couple of days old, I was adopted. My birth parents are Black Colombians, and my adopted family was Caucasian. In my parents' mind, I'm their child and they're white. And what does that make me? And my adoptive father has talked about what it was like for him to have my birth father, a black man, come to stay with them in their house and come to church with us. And for my adoptive dad to stand up and introduce who my birth father was. And he said, really, it was in that space when he really realized that everyone else in the church was looking at my birth dad and now suddenly at me as a black person. And that was never something he'd had to confront before. And suddenly he realized that that was something that I, as an adult, was connected to as well.
For me as a Latino, I can choose to be one of multiple identities. So if I moved to Michigan without talking, I could pass for Arab. If I moved to California, I could pass for Mexican. If I moved to Florida, I could be Cuban and Puerto Rican. If I'm in New York, I could be Dominican, Puerto Rican, or anything as long as I'm not downtown. That's where all the white folk hung out.
I had a girlfriend who was raised in a black family on the south side of Chicago, and she was the only mixed race person in her family. She ended up living in France for 6 years with her sister, who ended up settling in France. And over there, people there thought she was Moroccan because there's a large Moroccan and Algerian population. And so therefore, in that environment, she was treated the way North African women in France are treated. And she began to really identify with those relationships, and her primary source of support and relationships ended up being Moroccan and Algerian women. She started to really identify with that. And then when she came back to the United States, she had this experience where black folks didn't totally accept her. They did, but they didn't really understand the whole thing in France that she'd experienced. And then white folks treated her like she was black. And so she was moving between different racial dynamics in different social contexts. And somehow I was able to relate to her. And what it's helped me realize is that identity is complex. How we navigate and negotiate it is complex. And therefore, I think we have to come up with solutions to how we navigate the complexity of our identities that are more flexible than the rigidness of racism and race.
We're going to keep this moving. We're running out of time.
thought that my experience was the American experience, and that everybody in the whole United States had lived exactly as I did. And that's an experience where everybody looked exactly like me. So I was born in Medford, Oregon, and in Medford there were absolutely no people of color within the city limits. And then I met another woman, okay, when she was a girl, so we're 11 years old, and I meet another person who then becomes my best friend, and she still is my best friend. And her name was Serena Maria Cruz, right? So Serena, for me, wasn't of color. She was white. So we're graduating, we're setting up the PSAT to take the test, and this is where we've gone to school together for 5 or 6 years, and we've been to each other's houses, we've had birthday parties, we've been involved in the same gifted program activities, and she's filling out her form and filling out her race, and I'm filling out my form, and I look over at Serena and I see her filling out the bubble for Hispanic. And so I actually reach out and I grab her hand and I pull it up and I tell her, Serena, you're supposed to fill out the white bubble. And she looks at me and she says, look at me, Susie. She says, look at me, like this. And I looked at her and I didn't have any clue what she was talking about. I didn't know what she was talking about.
I think unconscious bias is really heavily implicated in white America's racial attitudes in this age of Obama, so to speak. On the one hand, I think a lot of white folks who actually admire President Obama a lot, who voted for him, who find him to be an extremely erudite, intelligent, capable leader. Nonetheless, and we know this from the studies, many of those folks will indeed have implicit associations between black folks and negativity, different stereotypes, different views, and they've taken many of the implicit association tests that have been run by Harvard and Princeton and others that can test for these sort of subconscious biases. And what those studies have found is 75% of white Americans have overtly pro-white, anti-black bias. Well, by definition, some of those folks voted for Barack Obama because he got about 44% of the white vote, 45%. So by definition, a large number of white folks who carry around this sort of baggage of bias and prejudice toward, let's say, the black community, are willing to carve out these exceptions for those who make us comfortable, who seem different from the norm.
Okay. And looking at the clock, I need to move some things along, but take 2 minutes and think about what you just saw. Who's willing to share? What resonated? What jumped out at you? What was new to you? Yes.
At the very end, when he said something about Obama, that jumped out at me right away, because I think that Obama was seen as a safe black person to vote for. That he could be elected, but say Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton or someone who was less black, so to speak, That just kind of jumped out at me there too, because I've often wondered about that.
Thank you. Yes.
I don't have to explain my identity. You know, and the folks in this video are explaining their backgrounds, who in their family is married to whom, and their racial and ethnic backgrounds, and I don't have to. And for me, it's kind of sad that people have to produce some sort of identification in order to fit in. And when, you know, I guess we hope for a society where, who cares? You know, why does it matter? You just accept people for people, but we aren't there.
So then that's privilege, is not having to, okay? Anybody else? I want to throw out a question.
Can I tell a story, just real quick?
Go ahead, they might knock on the door and tell us that we need to be done, but just go right
It'll be
ahead.
really fast.
Just go ahead.
I was volunteering with a program in our community called, it doesn't matter what it's called. And it was almost all with black kids from our community. One summer when I was working with this group, I had a really dark tan, and one of the kids asked me towards the end of the summer, because I was one of only a couple of white people who volunteered with this group, he looked at me and said, "What are you?" He asked me that question, "What are you?" And it took me back, and he was wondering if I was biracial, because he couldn't understand that, you know, at several levels, he couldn't understand why I was a white person working with all these black kids. At some level, but he's trying to figure out, so yeah, trying to figure out your identity is really, that stuck with me, that's probably 10, 15 years.
Yes.
I thought it was exact evidence from what Dr. Strayhorn was saying when it's constructed, you know, it's created by people around you or your experiences where, you know, somebody had to like shake the one woman and be like, look at me. And she like didn't really see color. But I worked in a daycare when I was in college, and I'll never forget this moment when the kids were lined up waiting out, you know, they have to go into the bathroom like 2 by 2 because there are only 2 stalls, and I was standing in front of the boys' room holding the door open to make sure they weren't behaving. And there was a little white boy, and then a mixed boy, and then a black boy, and they said, well, what do you think I am? And they're like, well, you're a marshmallow. He's like, well, I'm like more dark chocolate, and I'm almond. And I just like loved the whole conversation because they weren't, you know, they were just like talking innocently, and they weren't saying, I'm black, you're white, like, and not one of them came in and was like, no, you're black, no, you're biracial, no, you're, like, they were like, well, this is just what I look like, you know, reminds me that I'm an almond, and just show the innocence of children and how they look at the world.
Thank you. So the comment that you made earlier about harm and privilege, like we talk about this thing of privilege and white privilege and how it's harmed, you know, people of color. But how has privilege harmed you? I mean, that's a question that it continues to come back to me because, you know, if there's one group that is harmed by an action and we only focus on that one group and that harm, there's also harm that's happening on the other side too. And I'm curious, do you have any possible thoughts about?
I think the whole theme here is that when you're ripped from that sense of belonging, whether that's your identity or your culture, you're all of a sudden displaced, and then just that tears you apart. So foster care youth is a perfect example of that. And I think that for young people who are in this field and learning, and maybe you go home for Thanksgiving dinner and you start to listen to what your aunts and uncles are talking about, and it's a political race, or they're voting for Donald Trump, like, and you're just like, oh my gosh. And it's like, I wonder sometimes, like, am I feeling like rips from my sense of like my family unit because I don't agree with what they're saying, because I think that they're absolutely ignorant and ridiculous. This is not my whole family, just, you know, it's a couple of weirdos that we all have. And I think that that's interesting just to think of, and I never thought about that until I'm literally word vomit right now. and I don't think it's impacted me negatively or I need to go to therapy or anything, but that sense of belonging, when you get this education and that ignorance veil is kind of lifted, do you then yourself lose a little bit of your belonging? Thankfully, but I mean, I think that's even interesting.
Okay.
I don't know, that's kind of a quandary.
Anybody else? Yes.
Why do people make assumptions about what your life experience has been? I mean, people assume because I work at this university, I have right now a pretty middle class existence, that my life has always been like that. And I think, people do make assumptions because of maybe your color of your skin, that I'm white and I have privilege, that I haven't experienced poverty or other problems.
Okay.
And don't take into account that socioeconomic discrimination can happen for any background. So I think sometimes privilege gets assigned when I certainly didn't grow up feeling very privileged.
Right, and I want to be clear about why I am asking the question, because for me, as I look at privilege, I have privileges myself, right? But I'm not privileged by white skin, and I wonder, who is going to give up their privilege? Who's going to be like, well, I'll allow you to take right? That's going to be a hard thing to swallow, hard pill to swallow. This is just my own thinking. And so if it comes from a perspective of, well, how does this harm you? If you know that this is harming you, would you be more willing to give it some more thought, some consideration of what you might do to, to change some of that harm? That's why I asked the question, right? Because it just seems to me that, as social workers, I think we all want equity and equality and harmony, and that's why we're here. That's in all our different areas of the workforce. But does that make sense? What I'm saying? I was just curious.
Well, I think growing up, I probably missed opportunities to have friendships with people and connections with people.
Okay.
Frankly, I grew up in an all-white environment, and there was a lot of racist thinking, and I grew up telling racist jokes.
Okay.
It wasn't until I got older I realized that those are how inappropriate and harmful they were, and so I realized there was a period of time, and thanks to that I wasn't sensitized to those issues, and so I cut myself off to a lot of relationships and probably a lot of healthy thinking that now hopefully I'm in a better place. But,
okay.
I think that was harmful to my development as a person.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Now they asked me to be finished, and in my hurry to get things going and everything, I forgot. Whenever I do a presentation, I bring a gift, right? There might be some chocolate. I don't know if there's chocolate in it. There's just candy, okay? But the true gift, I'm going to pass this around. It's candy, so go ahead and grab some. Just pass it around. And I meant to present that at the beginning. But the true gift that we all get is learning something about ourselves or about each other that we didn't come into this room with, right? And so you get to leave with that gift. You get to leave with a new knowledge, a new understanding, oh snap, I really didn't think about it that way, right? So that's the gift that I hope that you have received from this session and today's conference, okay? And I really appreciate your openness and candor for just being here this afternoon.